Hey, Shane, we're back. It's Saturday, June 15th. We're so busy this week. I guess we couldn't get it done, but we're carving out Saturday to sort of get into reviewing this document that's going around the internet called Situational Awareness, written by Leopold Aschenbrenner. I think we could probably do this, over the next 35 minutes or something like that, maybe a little bit longer. But I know neither of us has fully read this document back and forth. So whatever we're going to say now about it, we may need to make an update to in another podcast that sort of, amends what we've after we've read it. We might have to amend it. But we felt like there was enough sort of noise on the internet about this document, and it kind of gives you another. I don't know. For me, it kind of gives me another insight to the kind of people that are working in the space at high levels. It feels like this. I listened to the podcast with I forgot who was doing it. A very long podcast. I'll come up with the name later, but it was a good podcast where he kind of riffs for about 3 hours, and you kind of get a little bit better background and reading.
Patel, right?
Yeah, that podcast. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, really lengthy podcast. I think they spoke, for something like 3 or 4 hours on just this paper, and it's a 165-page document, so there's a lot of content there to cover.
Right. And I think, if I listened to a good chunk of that podcast, and I these two those two guys know each other. They travel in the same sort of like, circles up in San Francisco. They're kind of going to the same parties. They're all the folks that are sort of writing this, reading this, and commenting on this at a high level are all sort of in the same sort of dinner circles. So it kind of gives, like, when I listened to the podcast and I read this document, I felt like I was getting like a view into how the sausage is being made in a way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Why don't we give listeners just a little bottom line upfront synopsis of what this document even is and who this guy is.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, it's a 3-parter. It's a beast of a document. I think it is something like 165 pages long. But it's written by Leopold Aschenbrenner. I'm probably totally butchering his name, but he's a former OpenAI employee who spent, I think, just shy of something like 2 years at the company working in super alignment. So I don't believe he is an engineer, but he's a young guy, and he's a very smart guy. He graduated Columbia, I believe, at 19. Won a prize there for best senior thesis in economics. But like I said, he's not an engineer. I don't say that to discredit his findings or predictions about this paper. But the paper is called Situational Awareness, and it really just takes a close look into previous trends in AI research, and then it tries to extrapolate and look at where are we headed over the next decade if you just follow the trend lines. And that really seems to be really the main thrust of this document, is if we just follow historic trends in advances in AI research, where are we going to be by the end of the decade, and really 10 years out from now. And his sort of bottom line up front conclusion here is that not only are we going to reach artificial general intelligence by the end of the decade, but we are likely to see something more like superintelligence, superhuman intelligence that is vastly smarter, not just than most humans, but PhD level folks in the industry. And then he jumps into a range of different implications for that. But it's a pretty bold prediction, and obviously has a number of very deep implications, not just for things like jobs and economics in general, but but really for geopolitics as well, and how we will function as a society. And it's been making its way, of course, through social media. A lot of people are talking about it. But it's worth a read if you get the time. At minimum, it's worth uploading to ChatGPT and asking it to summarize for you, because I think it's something, it represents a topic that I think everyone should care about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why I think that's a good summary of who Leopold is. I mean, he seems to, he comes out of the effective altruists kind of group. He worked for Sam Bankman-Fried, which kind of always sort of worries me when I hear people that used to work with him, because it's like, if you go and, if you're, I don't know, it's like, Sam's such a polarizing guy. He's a criminal and a crook and a con job. And if you're working for him or working with him, it seems to me that you kind of went along with his, not that you're aware that the guy was a con, but like you are involved in sort of like the charade, maybe unwillingly. And it kind of gives me a character. It calls in a character. But nevertheless, I think his document covers a lot of really interesting ground, like you said. And yeah, mostly how it's more like there's a lot of like economic data in here, rather than sort of like the computer engineering, machine learning experts knowledge. It's more like, hey, if this is happening, here are some things kind of for us to be concerned about. And I feel like for that, I appreciate that he wrote this. I mean, this is clearly a very thoughtful written document. He actually dedicates it to I guess maybe his mentor, Ilya Sushevitz, right, from OpenAI. So it feels like
that was going to be my first question to you. What do you make of the fact that he dedicated it to Ilya?
Ilya. Clearly, Ilya is another very smart guy, and he's probably one to admire. I feel like I don't know. I'm not close enough. I'm not in the dinner circles with these guys. So all of the folks that are the super alignment team that left OpenAI and their friends around it all kind of know really what's happening. And I feel like most of the world have no idea. And again, this document, I think, is a glimpse into like who's making it. You know what I mean? And Ilya and Leopold, these guys, Ilya is the co-founder of OpenAI, had the hands on the steering wheel, and Leopold may have had some hand on the steering wheel. But if you listen, I think the podcast is really interesting to listen to, because you can just see how they think and feel, and how what they think is actually funny. I think that podcast is really illuminating. I think this document is, like an economic insight of where, this one person thinks this thing's going. I actually, I can't say these. Haven't done the math, and I'm just taking these numbers for like what they are in this document. And I think if you look at it, it's like he's this sort of like point, like here at 2023, he's just saying like, hey, wow, we're going to grow, right? So here's your 27, 28 automated AI researcher. I think he's in his document, if you read it and if you listen to the podcast, he's sort of saying that like, we're going to get lots of improvements in AI that will continue to become more, just frankly magical, but just it will be able to do inference and training substantially better, largely because the companies that are making these AI models are investing. They're going from $10 billion investment into data centers and compute to $100 billion to $1 trillion. And so as you add that level of sort of computing and energy, you're going to get a better outcome in sort of inference and training. But I feel like what he's also saying is out here in these 26, 27, you're also going to get an algorithmic boost, meaning the software that's being developed that we call it, all just claim as LLM, that's going to get a massive improvement. But this automated AI researcher and engineer, whether we buy this or not from the engineering class, I would say that it's hard to imagine, but it's not unimaginable.
Yeah.
that he believes that, you'll be able to automate, you'll be able to sort of replicate like the smartest AI scientist and then clone, have 100,000 of them working for you 24/7, 24/7, 365 at peak focus performance, which will then give us another boost in sort of AI improvement. And at that level, you're, we don't know what we're going to get. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
And
And
just to give people a little more context, this graph really kind of encapsulates the progression of this three-part document in a lot of ways, right? So the first part, he really talks about how we what historical trend lines have been, right? So looking at the investment going into AI research and how we, achieve certain milestones. For example, going from, Chat GPT 2 to GPT 4. That really, sums up the first part of this document. The second part looks at how we go from really, what's going to happen in the next few years to then artificial general intelligence. And then the final document, the final part of the document, looking at like what are really the implications for this massive rate of change. But he spends a lot of time diving into, what is required to get us to these different milestones. Again, first to AGI, and then second to superintelligence, right? And some of the I think one of the most interesting things is that, it's not really about, thinking of things in terms of, the number of tokens that these models, can predict, or that they can output. It's really thinking about like what are the main assumptions that must be true in order to reach these milestones. And he boils it all down into this notion of, what he calls OOMs, orders of magnitude, right?
right.
And just in simple mathematical terms, it's a factor of 10 jump,
Yeah,
right?
right
So
here.
one order of magnitude is a factor of 10. So going from 10 to 100 to 1,000. And his predictions are that, we are making these order of magnitude jumps very rapidly. And he boils down these jumps into really unlocking three areas. The first is just raw compute. And then the second two relate to, improving or achieving algorithmic efficiencies, right? So it's not just investing a bunch of money into, things like data centers. The algorithmic efficiencies really boil down to how can we basically make these models work smarter, right? How can we unhobble them, as he says, and that's just things like, programming in certain techniques into the ways that the models think. And, his belief is that, a lot of the increasing capabilities will really boil down to, just being smarter with how they're programmed. And so if you think about it in terms of, more practical terms, I guess, GPT-2 to GPT-4 took us from, what he would say is the equivalent of a preschooler, to, a smart high schooler. And to go that next step, and that itself represents many, I think 3 or 5 orders of magnitude, he says, in terms of capabilities of thinking. He thinks we're going to see a similar step change in the next few years, going from that, smart high schooler to eventually, essentially a really smart PhD level, person, right? Which is going to require another several orders of magnitude, jump in terms of capabilities. And when you look at those different things that are going to unlock, the ability for us to make that step change, algorithmic efficiencies, unhobbling the models, improvements in compute, which is going to require a massive amount of investment. We're talking about several orders of magnitude, potentially a year, which is just kind of astounding progress to think about.
Yeah, and like kind of bringing it back to our business user, and what do you do if you're a small business or a medium business or you're a Fortune 100? The investment that Microsoft and Google and OpenAI and such, they're going to invest hundreds of billions of dollars to kind of get to a place where, I think they all have this goal in mind, and they actually think from an engineering standpoint, like if they add that much compute and they can get algorithmic efficiencies, and they can get the data to necessary to do this training, that they will get to a place where they will have. I'm not going to use the buzzwords like AGI or super intelligence. I'm going to say just like that they'll have the smartest algorithmic software tool on the planet Earth. And if you have that as a business, you're just going to be more effective. You're going to be more valuable. And so, Microsoft and Google can do this, OpenAI can do this, but if you kind of bring it back to the everyday business, it's like, well, what are you going to do?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you bring it back to yourself, like, what are you going to do? This is happening. This is not like whether the outcome is exactly the same. I think it's like this line is going to happen. Like, to me, when I first saw this, it looked like you're tracking a hurricane. It's like you don't know if it's going to hit what part of Florida, but it's going to hit. Like, the companies are not going to not invest in these data centers. We're going to go from a 10 billion to a 100 billion to $1 trillion data center. And the implications are, if you own those data centers, whether you're a government or you're a company, you will be stronger, better than the other companies. And that's what's at stake.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's, taking it out of this sort of geopolitical place, it's just like, as a small company, what are you going to do to sort of defend against companies that have these tools?
Yeah.
And I think and I'll show you a demonstration of this for the listener. You won't be able to see this, but on page 13, he has sort of some prompts that he'd placed in his document, which are sort of like worth sort of showing here. But it's let me get this a little bit weird, but there's a prompt that is now being able to be done in GPT-4 that says, can you generate a pie plot for the following data? And it's a complex set of data. And it sort of ends, he kind of gives this prompt kind of gives the exact description of what it wants. And the prompt is able to actually produce, really detailed graphs based on the prompt. Now that's at GPT-4. Now, if you kind of just say, okay, well, this is now, but by 2017, what kind of prompts do you think you'd be putting into these engines, these systems, where it could produce something, literally, seven more magnitudes greater, right? Like, it just starts to make you think, like, okay, like what will that do for my business? What will that do for my team or my staff? You know what I mean? So, whether you believe it's AGI or super intelligence, just, I don't know, if your calculator that you have in your hand just became, so much better and smarter than the next guy, you win. Like, you have tools that can help you win. And I feel like when I'm reading this document and I'm hearing the discussion that he's having, to me it's slightly esoteric because it doesn't really spell out, like, how do I or you or a company with executives, how are they going to actually use this tools or this tooling to outperform their competitors?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
When I hear AGI and I hear superintelligence, I'm like, okay, that's cool. Sounds a little sci-fi. What does that mean for me if I'm running, like, I don't know, the largest, like, glass manufacturer in North America? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
How do I incorporate that into my business? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's missing. And I feel like in a later podcast, I think we can come back with some use cases here, but it's just, for me, it's like, for the listener, they're very complex prompt going in. So you have to be smart enough to write the prompt, and you want the computer to kind of build this out for you. You have to assume that, like, that these tools are going to allow you to kind of create complex software that can contemplate really deeply a lot more data than you can as a human, and come back with you with substantially interesting results. You still have to actually interpret that, but it may just actually exceed your intellect to contemplate. Like, so that's the future state. And I feel like if you're a government or you're a company and you're not becoming aligned with the way the compute systems are developing, you're in big trouble, you know? So
Yeah. And this is not about being fanboys of AI either, right? To believe all of this could be true, right? And he makes several disclaimers in this document. It's like whether or not you believe that this is going to happen, you need to prepare for the eventuality that if it's not, AGI or superintelligence, we are talking about models that are vastly superior to even the best ones that we know of today. And one of the drivers to that is just simple capitalism, really. Because prior to, certainly prior to GPT-2 and the earliest versions of ChatGPT, there just wasn't this much focus, on what is happening in the AI community. A lot of people thought we were in an AI winter for several years. But now with the success of tools like ChatGPT, every single major tech company is now pouring ungodly amounts of money into their own solutions, right? It's massive data center buildups. There's billions of dollars being invested just into, being able to, achieve these algorithmic efficiencies that we're talking about. And quite frankly, I think a lot of even the models that get ignored today are a lot more powerful than people give them credit for. So, we're going to see another, to me, it's just, it's inevitable that we're going to see much more powerful models. And I think you're totally right. And we say this, we sound like a broken record probably on all of our podcasts. Like you need to be thinking about not just like, how do you use these solutions in their current forms, but, 2, 3, 5 years in the future, maybe even 6 months in the future when they are vastly more powerful than they are today.
yeah, I think we are a broken record, and I think that's part of our business is to be a broken record on this because this stuff is sort of esoteric where it's like you kind of don't necessarily know how to actually apply it. If you're Mark Zuckerberg or you're Amazon, like Mark Zuckerberg, like again, like building a social media, I've had the opportunity of building a large social media network out in the 2000s, and algorithmic approaches to deal with all the data that we were dealing with, both from the ad tech side and as the consumer product needed to actually select images, you needed to use algorithms. So like you look at a company like Facebook, they've been algorithmically presenting content and ads to you for 2 decades, or such. And so they're really aligned in that business. But if you're not from that sort of that world and you don't have that craft work, you really don't understand how powerful it is. And big tech is about to get substantially more powerful because when you look at it, Zuck, this isn't fact, but it's close to maybe fact. Maybe he bought 350,000 H100s. That's a multi-billion-dollar purchase. Do you know what I mean? And it's not just the buying of the chips from NVIDIA. You actually have to buy a data center. You're going to have to buy power systems and air conditioning systems to support that. So really not every business in the world is actually even financially capable of building out AI infrastructure for their business. It's financially impossible. And it's also probably from a US government perspective, you probably need to start thinking about your GDP, how much GDP goes to actually funding, building out the electrical grid to actually support having AI systems to help run the military. You know what I mean? These are questions that have to happen right now because, if it was just one company, like, hey, Facebook's on a lark, they're building out a data center, it's going to cost $100 billion to do it. One might say, that seems like a crazy endeavor, but it's not that. It's all of them. Amazon, Meta, Microsoft, Google, NVIDIA, Oracle. You know what I mean? They're all building these data centers because they understand that, like, to have such an economic investment is going to give them the edge that will last them probably a lifetime. And
I'm looking at another graphic here from a separate report, and I think this was maybe referenced in the report that we're talking about also. But if you just look at capital expenditures from Meta, Google, and Microsoft prior to ChatGPT, those aggregate capital expenditures were less than 30 billion. By the end of this year, 150 billion plus.
Right.
Right. And that's just 3 companies. Right. So, if we achieved the performance that we, all of us who've used ChatGPT for, in just that, few short years, and now we are pouring billions upon billions more into improving these systems and creating new ones. Like, one can only imagine, the explosion of intelligence just from the immediate investments. But that's another thing here is like a lot of the gains, I think, are very investment driven, right? And one of the points made in this new report is that at some point in the near future, it won't just be about the investment that we're making. It'll be about the returns that these companies are then seeing, right? So the milestone that the author mentions here is really like once big tech companies are able to generate, something on the order of 100 billion a year in revenues, it will essentially create this sort of self-fulfilling or virtuous cycle in which that investment just continues to ramp up and ramp up and ramp up. And that's one of the main things I think that unlocks, what everyone refers to as superintelligence, right? So what we're essentially talking about is just this exponential growth curve that we're heading towards, and that I would argue we're really already on.
Yeah, I it's like I mean, the technology that's going to be built here is going to give the richest companies in the world an economic advantage, and the reliance on their AI systems for the rest of the companies in the world will be as such that they will benefit financially massively. Do you know what I mean? It's like, we're already seeing that. Like Microsoft Azure is actually sort of building out a lot of OpenAI infrastructure. They're already seeing this isn't like a frontier tech where you build it and then money will come in a decade. They're building it and money's coming now, right? Power companies are starting to see that there's going to be a whole new demand. You know what I mean? In power generation. So this is like I always tell business people, it's like you may not be prepared for this, you may not even be able to get your brain around it, but it's like you're preparing for a hurricane. Like you may not understand like how a hurricane feels or what it's going to do, but it's coming. It's like this is the weather report. It's coming. Your job as an executive is to surround yourself with thinkers that can guide you and your business to a place that can use this to your advantage. The longer you wait with developing your team's core competency of understanding how this could work in your business and your workflows, really sort of sets you back and could actually clobber you completely out of business. And so what Shane and I are doing is we're reading this document. We're reporting on it right now without having fully read this document, but we're going to read this like 3 or 4 more times. And as we go and meet with businesses, we're going to kind of explain to them in more detail like how they need to leverage it. Not all companies are going to be able to build $100 billion compute cluster. They're going to have to leverage that compute cluster that Microsoft or Google's making.
Yeah, I think quite frankly, I think I recommend you read the document. There are certainly other opinions in the industry that will diverge from what is in this document, but quite frankly, I don't think you need to read it to, just think through the implications here, right? And because if you listen to what any other tech CEO is saying, it's all kind of the same thing. They've all got their own essentially Manhattan Project going on to try to create, this artificially, generally intelligent machine. And if you think through it in practical terms, right? So one of the things mentioned in this document, which we've talked about at length on other podcasts, is just the notion of, agents, right? So one of the big milestones going from something like what we have today to, something that is more generally intelligent is the ability for these agents not just to respond, with immediate answers to your queries, but being able to plan and reflect and be endowed with tools to go off and do projects by themselves, right? So he talks about what I think is a very realistic picture of a very close future in which you're not just working with something like ChatGPT, but now you've got something that's really akin to a remote worker that you just drop into your company. It immediately onboards itself by reading all of your company docs, understanding all of the code base that your company is working on, and then being able to get immediately up to speed to go out and execute tasks for you, right? And it's not going to be just one of these. He's talking about millions upon millions of these agents, not just going off and being able to do these projects, but to collaborate with each other to do them. And that is, I think, really one of the only things, practically speaking, that, companies can, especially small companies, can start doing to prepare themselves, to start thinking through, how we might be, able to leverage a workforce like that. I know we're nowhere near, I know we're not near that point now, but there are, I think, ways of thinking and workflows that can at least begin to approximate that type of work. I think of certain, tools now like make.com, Zapier, for example, that I think give us a little bit of a glimpse into that future. And I think if you're not experimenting with different workflows and automations like that now, I think you're doing it at your own peril, because quite frankly, there's just a lot of automations that you can now do that are huge productivity unlocks for people.
Yeah. So I think what you're like, so I think right now, when the average business person listens to all this kind of stuff, like like they should immediately be thinking about how automation is going to happen they need to become, we explained to them, is like, you need to start thinking about how your team gets work done, jobs to be done, and then how will the jobs be done as you add AI, and how does that affect you? And so adopting a mindset of automation and using the tools. Because like AI, a lot of people are using ChatGPT, which is like, prompt interface as a chatbot, but that's kind of really like it's a chatbot, but there are people now writing really complex software workflows around those things where you're not necessarily dealing with a chatbot, you're actually dealing with like a workflow. And you can also start building your own workflows, whether you're using some automation tools like Make or Zapier, but you could also have your engineering team use LangChain or Crew and start building really your own complex workflows that have AI in the loop to sort of help speed the process of your daily work, right? And so I think even saying that, I know that there'll be someone listening and they'll be like, well, what does that mean? And the reason why many of us can't simply just say, here's what it means, is like everyone does their jobs differently in their workspace, and they have their own policies, their own procedures, their own styles. But if, point A is the start of work and point Z is your output, and that output is what you need on the regular, well, between A and Z, there's probably going to be a way to automate a bunch of that work. And an example of that, and I forgot the name of the company, and maybe Shane will refresh my memory. I think it's called Ellipses, but it's a very simple sort of software AI automation that for engineers is like when they're actually providing their code to have reviewed by, let's say, a senior engineer who's going to handle what we call a merge or pull request. You can install Ellipses, and it will read your code, and it will kind of create a level of documentation and merge notes so that you can kind of speed up the process of getting that job done. And the reviewer can actually literally chat with the code and the merge or the pull request and kind of get some bugs fixed and get it all documented and then released. And that's kind of like an engineering workflow, but that's done now a lot of times through a manual process. And there's Ellipses is actually kind of finding a way to help you kind of, use AI to actually shorten that cycle. But that's like one example, but there's literally a trillion examples in businesses that could be automated and using AI. And that's where the mindset of adopting this will help you kind of get your job done. And it will be a requirement in the future. And you may be able to adopt that in 4 or 5 years and still be fine. But the companies that adopt it earlier, or the AI emergent companies that will actually have adopted it as a practice from day one, like Shane and I are doing with our company, um, your mindset will be so much faster and shrewder than everyone else that you'll just outmaneuver everybody. And this for the viewer that's watching the video, you're seeing here the quarterly NVIDIA data revenue. It's like you can see that the best companies in the world are already doing that. They're building the AI systems and they're actually benefiting from it right away. So you as a small business, it's more about like a mindset and an automation step for you to actually start engaging and using this stuff. This document is showing us that again, this is like more like a weather report than an actual like an exact blueprint. But it's again, I think we're repeating ourselves here, Shane. But like you're saying, everyone should read this. I think we're going to read this a couple more times. We'll circle back and probably do a more thorough review of this document. We just wanted to actually get out on the record on this thing because it was pretty compelling. We also think, Shane, the power generation that's going to be required to fuel, like let's say, the United States has 10 of these, $10 trillion, that's $10 trillion data centers. That is using a substantial amount of US's electrical capacity. Like that's just a totally different thing that, economists need to price into the model. And I think it's, if you're an investor, and you're looking at like, 10 of these things going in America, it sounds like we're going to have to order up more power. You know what I mean? Like, every one of these data centers has huge power requirements, air conditioning, compute. I mean, it is a huge cost.
Yeah, his predictions. I'm looking at a chart on page 77. By 2030, to support the infrastructure required to make these huge leaps in intelligence is something on the order of 20% of total U.S. electricity production. That's a staggering amount. So
right here, the Hoover Dam or large nuclear reactors.
But again, his point is really, all you have to do is follow the trend lines here. And when you think about, again, the assumptions that need to be true, it's really not all that far-fetched to think that at least some situation that is close to what he is predicting is feasible.
Yeah, I mean, I actually, he puts out some really, like, he puts some scary stuff in there about security and national security, and I think those are really important for policymakers. And I unfortunately think that we need to actually influence our policymakers more. And I think it's funny because I think after this report was sent out, it's been going around, not that it encouraged OpenAI, but they actually added like a former NSA director to the board of directors of OpenAI. I mean, I do think that these labs that are creating the technology and the data centers, they do become national treasures. I don't think that but again, your point, our country is moving this direction. Like, again, it's a hurricane coming in. Its impact may vary. It may be, not as great as everyone's predicting, or it could be a lot worse. I actually think that if you're a business, you need to basically prepare as if there is a hurricane coming in and you don't understand the impact. Like, you just, and if you're not, you're sort of like in big trouble. I just think it's, it's inevitable that this technology is going to come. He's saying 2027, 2026. That's 3 years away. right? That's just a couple years away. That's like
Yeah, and I mean
36
one of
months.
the assumption here is like, look, in order to see these huge step size increases, it does require a massive amount of investment. And some people may say, well, there's just not the appetite, um, to make these investments. That is clearly wrong, right? We talked about a lot of the private companies that are already making massive, massive investments. But there's also just historical precedent, and he points to many of them. Everyone's familiar with the Manhattan Project, the Apollo program. Those were, he says, about 100 billion annually in today's dollars. We're far surpassing that with just, a few tech companies. Um, he talks about between, in the late 90s, telecoms invested nearly $1 trillion in today's dollars, in those initiatives. He points to the British railway investments, made in the 1800s. That was 40% of GDP at the time, right? So there have been several historical precedents when you think of new general purpose technologies.
Right,
And
like
many
shipping.
many trillions today are being spent on things like the green transition. I mean, just think about what happened during COVID. Um, to me, it's inevitable that pretty much every major developed economy will be making similar sized investments, and that really kind of takes us to the end of the paper, which is really the implications, not just from a societal point of view, but from a geopolitical perspective. I mean, China is fully mobilized behind their own AI initiative. And so one of the things, you and I talk about in response to this, Anthony, is that, AI literacy, this notion of um, really educating oneself on what is happening. And I think reading this document is just one small sliver of doing that, um, is really a national security issue, right? And, if you think about these trends as being inevitable, whether it happens by 2027 or 2037 is kind of besides the point for me. If you think about it being inevitable, then one of the only things that you can do as an individual or small business, which in the grand scheme of things, compared to, players like NVIDIA, Microsoft, is really small and insignificant. I think one of the best things you can do is just inform yourself, because the only thing I think that will slow down any of this is policy. And that is really impacted by things like, voting and making decisions. And it's really difficult to do that if you're not educating yourself on the trends starting now, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I got a slide up on or a section up, Shane, on for the listener, on page 71 that sort of shows, on the X um and the Y progress in time, and he sort of has like a line that basically says, hey, the automated AI researcher, when that arrives, if it arrives, it may never arrive.
Yeah.
Uh, but let's say something similar to, like, it just makes it makes work happen faster as a result. All the things that are sort of that kind of go up, straight up, parabolic, is like, cognitive labor, science, technology, robots, military edge, and GDP. Like, they're, for the countries that own these things are all going to go up, 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 right? The countries that don't own these things are kind of going to be left behind, right?
Yeah.
And that also means, like, you as a company will be left behind if you're not sort of benefiting in this. And so I do think that the AI technology, it's not science fiction to think that all of us will have the ability to use it if we prepare. I think what you were just saying about national security is, for the curious and for the capitalists, you need to actually become, at the very least, AI literate, and we recommend becoming AI fluent. I think there's going to be a requirement in boards to have essentially CEOs or sort of some sort of chief executive that's involved in the organization of their AI efforts. Because if you're not going to be adopting a mindset as a company, you're going to be in big trouble. And so I think that that has the same here, that we need the same sort of executive functions in government and policy, I hope that we don't end up in a sort of a gridlock situation. Shane, we talk about this all the time. You know what I mean? That we don't want regulatory capture of this entire AI industry being run by people on Capitol Hill. But at the same time, we also don't want to see our country get rated for our best, brightest minds and having our IP stolen and going to foreign countries. I think that's a really big deal. So we should be thinking this is like a national treasure and be treating it as such.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of people we have worked with, countless artists and creatives, for example, in the past several years, who I think for very justifiable reasons have been opposed to what they're seeing in AI. There's going to be a lot of displacement for sure, and it's not just the creatives. It's really, if you're talking about something like AGI, you're talking about something that can replace really any kind of work, right? But I think there's also
that's where robots come in. It's like that's why robots has that line. It's like the cognitive stuff could get really replaced by really smart computers, but at some point, the reason why Elon Musk and there's 55 other humanoid robot businesses built right now is that the world around us is designed to fit humanoid shapes, and as humanoid robots get deployed, you could have them, working in a McDonald's, or you could have them, cleaning a hotel, and the machine vision and the learning that's required to do that will all be sort of available, post, a significant event in AI that it will affect all jobs, not just cognitive jobs. It will affect like your average, it's like, hey, I hear these comments like, just become an electrician or a plumber. It's like, yeah, that's totally good. If you feel like you want to do that work, it's actually admirable work. But I don't think that's 100% defendable by just being able to be a human. I think robots can stack a semi full of boxes probably a lot better than a human, today. And so those systems just need to get bought and rolled out. So I feel like, we talk about this thing, compression. I think robots at the bottom end are going to start pushing up and compressing sort of like labor jobs, like physical labor. And then from the top down, you're going to have cognitive function jobs like that are going to be pushing down. And so the capitalist system is just going to say, we're not going to need as many workers. We may need different workers. Maybe the net employed number just shifts. But you as an employee or an executive, you need to actually shift how you work and why you work. You need to start adopting a very sort of critical strategic plan to become AI enabled, AI literate, AI fluent, AI optimized now, because this timeline's moving very fast.
Yeah, and where I was kind of going with that. So I totally agree with that. But I think there is a lot of justifiable reason to be very skeptical and terrified of what is coming. But I also think there is really an ideological, philosophical, a geopolitical consideration here that should also be encouraging us to not be so hyper focused and committed to just putting the brakes on, right? Because every major developed economy, especially countries like China, are forging ahead. And to me, that is maybe the overriding factor that makes me want to continue to see the United States, make these massive investments. Because if we don't, they are going to anyway.
Well,
right?
You want to see the investment in sort of like Western democracies, like as opposed.
It's not just the United States. It's Western Europe. It's really just democracies in general. I think it is critically important for those countries and economies to modernize as much as possible. I think the debate is really, how do you do it? How do you do it in an intelligent way that benefits as many people as possible? And that, I think, is a debate that obviously it's happening, but I think it's impossible to have that debate or to have an informed opinion on that debate if you yourself are not, educating yourself on what is happening now. And that is really the thing that, you and I are trying to advocate for and address with co-AI. Because, you're not going to, you as an individual, you as a small company, certainly a small or medium-sized business, or even just a really successful tech company may not have all that much influence, in the grand scheme of things, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't, be educating yourself and accumulating the knowledge that you can to at least understand the debate. And maybe that sounds a little defeatist, but I just think that it's, you ignore it at your own peril.
Yes. And I mean, precisely. We have for some listeners that are just joining, Shane and I operate a community called CoAI. The URL's getcoai.com. And we have a great team of people that are sort of constantly investigating new, exciting AI software that's being released daily, some of which are amazing. And we basically stack rank all of those. And then, we have programs that you can kind of buy into and get sort of consultants and advisory services from us. And we really do, we're making our community mission is to sort of make, 1 million people AI literate, and hopefully, a couple thousand of those to become AI fluent. But it's going to take a community effort. And we know that if you're running a business, you just kind of don't have like an easy way to order up an AI team or an AI product team to think about your business. And we're sort of offering that sort of on a fractional basis. So, for sure, if you're listening to this or someone sent this to you, you can reach out to us, and we have ways to engage with you, big and small companies. We really want to see, more companies sort of flourish than actually perish. And that's why we're doing this. When calling up this thing, it's like, just kind of switching back to the document for a second, and I think you were, saying that like, we could look at this with a bit of shade or a side eye, because not everything does come true. Everything kind of comes, in lumpy ways, right? Like, we overestimated the internet in the 90s, but then like in the late 2000s, what we overestimated in the 90s came true, and you have now really big businesses that are all online, right? I think that will happen here. But this thing I have written in yellow or underlined in red for the people that are viewing the video, it says, he's talking about, adding, 100 million new human hires would be difficult for any company, right? The United States is literally 350 million people, not all of them.
Yeah, I mean, just think about how hard it is to onboard one employee.
Like, so exactly. So capitalism rewards efficiency, right? This is just, you on a cultural basis, you might want to have a great team around you, but, at some point, like, hey, can we afford to add, 10 synthetic, AI thinkers to our team? This is what it's going to cost us on an annualized basis. Yes, we can afford it. You add them, and each one of those, and I'm saying humans, but really I think about these things as being like highly trained, agentic sort of like agent-based workflows that you could add to your company. Like right now, you're used to buying software. Hey, I want to get an ERP system, or I want to get a CRM system. I think that in the future goes away. I think you're going to be like, I want to hire a CRM bot. It doesn't even it just does all the CRM work for you. Your employees don't have like buttons to type into. The CRM system is like doing the CRM all work for you. And your CRO is like actually being able to be way more efficient. So the underline here, I say he's written, it's like, you won't have to worry about politicking or cultural accumulation and so on. They'll work with peak energy and focus day and night.
Yeah.
For a capitalist goes, you go, oh, what? I want one of those, or I want two of those. And what will happen is you'll just say, if I add 5 of those and it costs me $1 million a year for every 5, can I make $10 million a year for it? If that starts to pan out, then all that cognitive labor kind of gets moved into these like agentic bots. And I think that that's the way we want executives to think. Not that we want an outcome where your businesses are all just like run by these sophisticated pieces of software. We just think that that's the way it's going to happen. We're not throwing shade on that. We think that's going to happen.
Well, I think, and this is a point that I agree with him on. I actually think that his estimates may be conservative in a lot of ways, and he points to numerous examples, which you and I are well aware of just how much we have, and people in the scientific community in particular, have underestimated, if anything, progress in AI systems. And if you have been paying attention to the benchmarking discussion at all, we continue to, it seems, shift the goalpost in terms of how we measure just how capable these AIs are.
Today,
in other words, we continue to invent more and more difficult ways to test these AIs, and it seems like every step of the way, the advancements are coming sooner, and the capabilities are much stronger than we ever thought. And I mean, Anthony, I've brought this example up numerous times, Steve. I remember, I've been reading AI books for years now, and I remember my favorite, one of my early favorites, several years back was, Life 3.0. And, in the very beginning of the book, I think it was, he brings this graphic up where it's like, this is it represented the landscape of different jobs that eventually would be automated by AI. And at the top end of that landscape were all the creative jobs. Like, these are going to be the ones that go last because it's just so difficult. But you fast forward, 5-7 years, those are the jobs that went first, or are starting to be threatened first, at least. So that's, if you just think about the historical trends, and again, that's probably the biggest theme of this report, is just follow the trend lines.
Right. This line right here, like,
just follow the trend lines, whether it's, compute capabilities or algorithmic efficiencies, or, the costs required to achieve, certain gains. They are all pointing in one direction. And that is that whether it's 2027 or some point 5 or 10 years in the future, things are going to get a lot weirder. These agents are going to be a lot more capable. So to me, none of that is really in question.
Right.
I think if you could pick this apart and if you were being a little more critical, it might be in, how this benefits people, who it really benefits. Because I think there is an argument to be made that, well, yeah, all these companies are going to generate, trillions of dollars in wealth, but are they going to share it? That's just a totally different issue. Right? Yeah. If you can do, the work of millions of engineers, within a day, like, is that value going to accrue to me as just a normal worker?
Well,
I think that's
yeah. So, yeah. I think that's like, that I haven't read the full document. I don't know if he touches on this point at all. Some of us already went through this. Like, if you were, if you watched the 90s and the 2000s, we saw the shift to the internet. It's like there was a lot of money's accrued to very few sort of, internet winners, right? And some people didn't get anything. I think that, like, a lot of that's just that's repeating here, right? Yeah. Like, there's going to be a lot of wealth accruing to the incumbents. And I think that there's going to be, oftentimes you hear the same people that are investing in these companies, they keep saying that there's going to be all this abundance, but I don't think they're saying there's going to be abundance for people that are uneducated and don't know how to use this technology. I think that there's no abundance for that, right? I think there's abundance for people that are actually have the means and the sort of agency to become AI literate and prepare for this. And so, again, I'm using the hurricane metaphor. Like, if you're here, if you read the news and you say there's a hurricane coming and you have the means, you board up your house and you leave. But if you don't have the means, you get a lot of water in your house and you may lose your life. That's as simple as, like, so I'm looking at this image on my screen on page 48 of the document. And to me, that looks like a hurricane coming in. We have no idea if there's going to be an automated AI researcher ever that's going to happen. And that might not happen. But we know that the computers are going to get smarter and faster, and things are going to get more automated. And if they get automated in ways, you may have a requirement for fewer teammates. The requirement for you to be more AI, more computer literate, and more sophisticated in the way you run your business is going to go up, not down. And that this hurricane may not affect you at all, but it might affect your industry, and you need to just be prepared. And so we're dedicated to sort of helping you figure that out. I think we're going to need to wrap this up, but I mean, I feel like we'll come back to this document in a later podcast when we have read it more thoroughly, and we can kind of come back. We are also reading sort of the sort of backlash on Twitter and whatnot. I think, there's some people that are.
Well, so the document presents as a research report, an academic research report, but it reads more like a book or a blog. And I've tracked some of the conversation. I've read the great majority of the document, but I've tracked some of the conversation on Twitter, and I think it would be a mistake to listen to people who criticize this document because of the way it's written. I think it's a mistake to listen to people who criticize the author because he's not an engineer. Also, I think again he's really just looking at the quantifiable trends and all the things that we've talked about. Of course, we'll look at many other documents in the future also, but I think this should start becoming part of your information diet if it's not already. Because I would, don't just take our word for it. Do your own research, right? We're trying to build Co-AI into a source that you go to do just that, right? So we've got plenty of summaries of the latest research and the most important research that's come out. Anthony, you mentioned the leaderboards of different AI software tools that are coming out. Definitely take time to experiment with those. And we'll be coming out with more and more news just on a more timely basis, like what's happening in real time. So incorporate as much of it as you can into your information diet. I know it's totally overwhelming because even people who work in this industry and are down in the weeds have trouble staying up with it. So if this is all totally foreign to you, we know it's overwhelming. But that's what, just start small. Right? Yeah, something is better than nothing.
Right. And sort of Shane agreed. And if you're an executive or you're and you want to sort of join us for a private breakdown session, we have those as well. Because we know that, to the point Shane was just saying, it's just so sort of overwhelming. So we've put together sort of executive briefings for teams or individuals. We do think that you need to start making time for this, and one way to make time for it, it's like the gym membership or getting a trainer. Like you make way more time for it when you have a trainer, because they're showing up at your house and you're paying the bill. And so we're establishing that with Co-AI in our community. It's like join the community, set up some time with us, and we can sort of from both from a technical and executive and sort of MBA sort of point of view, we can like help you look at how your company can become AI literate and fluent and prosper. And this document is a great document for us to discuss. Like I said, Shane, we'll probably come back to this. I think this was a pretty good start.
And we'll of course post a link to the document in the show notes if you're interested in checking it out and can't find it.
Yeah, we'll have some summaries on our URL, getcoai.com. It's Saturday. It's a beautiful day. We got to get outside and spend some time with our families. But we hope that you enjoyed this. Shane, you have a great day.
Likewise. Thanks for listening. And I would just say, again, to the point of it being overwhelming, we especially want to hear from you if you consider yourself just completely incompetent in this area. There's a lot of communities out there that I think already super serve the engineers of the world. They super serve the AI obsessed of the world. I think there are much fewer organizations and sources and companies that are trying to reach just common people who have no idea what's happening. So if that is you and you don't know where to get started, reach out to us. If you want to know who to follow on Twitter or what to read or where to go to find the latest research, reach out to us. And we'd be happy to talk to you.
Right on. All right, everyone. See you next week.